What a squirrel. He's got the country in a whirl. What's his name? Shh, secret squirrel. He's got tricks up his sleeve. Most bad guys won't believe. A bulletproof coat, a cannon hat, machine gun came with a rat. 5, 4, and 5, his disguise takes him many places. He's a squirrel of many faces. Who's that? Who's that? Who's that? Secret squirrel.
I love it. Oh my goodness. What an introduction. Good morning, everyone. This is your favorite spy who loves liberty. This is Gregory Carpenter, Gregory Junkbond Carpenter from the People's Democratic Republic of Northern Virginia, wishing you a very, very happy Monday. We're delayed a little bit this morning because we are an ice-filled People's Democratic Republic of Northern Virginia. We lost our power here just minutes before we were to come on air. So I started running around, and being a good prepper as I am, as I was taught by Suzanne Sherman, I have my generator here. My generator's running outside right now. I have, and you might be happy to hear this, Suzanne, who's sitting in the background, hiding and laughing to herself at my misfortunes, I'm very sure, with our producer, Jeff Johnson. You might be happy to know that I have a 7.8 kilo generator out here to manage all of my spy equipment. Do you think that's enough for me?
Not even close. Good morning.
The surveillance state must have power, doggone it.
And, you know, this is up Suzanne's alley because we do talk a lot of prepping on her show. And it's supposed to get really bad here on our neck of the woods, too, Greg. We're supposed to get a mixture of stuff, which means ice and sleet and stuff. So we're going to be starting later today with the same thing you have right now.
Terrible, terrible, terrible stuff. So, folks, beware. Be ready. It is hovering right at 0 degrees Celsius, which for the American English-speaking world is about 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Or, in other words, I'd like to say it's give or take about 280-something degrees Kelvin. Now, there's an absolute number we can all work with. Everybody, everybody in the scientific community loves the Kelvin scale, and can you blame them? I mean, it tells you everything you wanted to know about the weather. But I digress. Celsius and Fahrenheit, folks, is not a good measurement of temperature. And we'll get into that in one show one day. I'm sure we could do that. Jeff, would that not excite you to cover why Celsius and Fahrenheit stink?
Well, I kind of sort of would because I'm a Calvinist.
He's the guy we see on the back of the cars, right? On the rear windows, peeing on everyone. Is that Kelvin?
That would make me Hobbs.
Humor on these morning shows, you know.
Oh, good Lord.
Well, it's 6 degrees here, and I'm snowed in again.
Now you see, that's a relative term. 6 degrees. Now, is that Fahrenheit, or is that Celsius, or is that Kelvin?
This is Fahrenheit.
Fahrenheit, Lord Fahrenheit.
Yes. F as in, F, I'm snowed in again.
Oh, Fahrenheits.
Oh, Fahrenheit.
Ouch. So there you go. That's a relative term, folks. And I don't like to deal with relativisms, but we'll do that with the temperature for now. Getting back to the show today.
We never got to it.
We're working our way towards getting to the theme of the show today. I figured today what I would do is Suzanne had a topic that she floated to Jeff and I just the other day, and it had something to do, let's just say, with the government and some things that happened back in the 1860s that nobody really knew about. I did. Unfortunately, I was very aware of that and several other atrocities that happened. So I figured that I would bring up some of the other issues that we've had with the government over the years, where the government, what would be the word, lied extensively.
No.
Yeah, no, stay with me, Suzanne. This really happened.
Wow.
They lied extensively and they killed thousands of people.
I don't know. I'm about to go over to Rush.
Don't do it. Don't push that button.
Uh.
Stay right where you are. Enthralling programming coming your way next. So I'm going to start with something that many people might know about. Now, I don't know if either you or Jeff have heard of this, but this is the Tuskegee syphilis study. Have you ever heard of this?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes. I have.
Jeff,
Yeah.
how about you?
I've
right.
heard of it. I'm just not very well versed on it.
Okay. So I'm gonna cover a little timeline of some of the events that happened first, and then we're gonna get into what actually happened and what happened with the people. I'm gonna cover a little timeline of some of the events. That was serious feedback. I loved it. Did you hear that?
Sorry, I was cutting and pasting our YouTube feed.
That's cool. It was like me talking to myself, teaching myself about the Tuskegee syphilis study.
Did you learn anything?
There. I mean, your big feedback just went like crazy in my earphones.
Did it stop now?
Oh yeah, yeah.
It only happened when I talked before.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. I feel like more of a man than I was before.
Wow.
More of me talking. So, folks, if you don't know about it, the Tuskegee syphilis study was a deliberate action on the part of the government to infect black men in Alabama, in Tuskegee, Alabama, with syphilis and study what happened to them over the next 40 years. Now, think about that for just a minute. It initially involved about 600 black men. 399 of them had syphilis. 201 of them did not have the disease at all. The study was conducted without the benefit of any type of patient-informed consent. And this is one of the reasons why you have the informed consent laws the way they are today. It's not to protect you from your practitioner. It's not to protect your practitioner from you. It has nothing to do with that. It's to protect you from the government. Now, think about that for just 1 second. The informed consent laws protect you from the government. That is just a horrible, horrible thought. That's something that probably should have been stuck back in the Bill of Rights so it could be ignored today. But now don't laugh, Jeff. That's a serious...
That was me.
Oh, sorry, Suzanne. What state, what federal entity pays attention to the true intent of the Bill of Rights? Give me one example, please. We'll set the clock here for 6 years. Okay, that's what I thought. We didn't have to wait long, did we? Oh my gosh. So let's go back to the beginning of what happened with Tuskegee. And it all starts back with Booker T. Washington. Now, he was at the Atlanta Cotton Exposition, and he outlined a dream for Black economic development and gains and support of Northern philanthropists, because he believed that that type of support would bring more wealth and benefit to the Black people in the depressed areas of the South. So 5 years later, the Tuskegee educational experiment got what was called, it was widespread report, but it got the Rosenwald Fund to provide money to develop schools, factories, businesses, and invest in the agriculture of the area. Now, a few years later, Booker T. Washington ends up passing away, as we know, and Robert Morton took over all of his work. Excuse me. It continued to grow and blossom. The work that was done in Tuskegee, in the factories and the businesses and things like that, started to blossom. People had better jobs, they had better lives for themselves, their families, and they were doing much better. But as all things go, the 1920s brought a major awareness, as it did the previous century during the war between the states. It brought an awareness to public health. Now, public health is related to medicine. Medical treatment involves one person, one on one with a physician or a provider of some kind. Public health looks at the overall health of the population, the effects of different types of diseases on that population, the resiliency of the population to survive certain diseases. Well, in the mid 1920s, syphilis was a major health problem. That's a thing that sent Al Capone up the river. Al Capone had syphilis, and he eventually died from syphilis. If you don't know, syphilis is much like the disease is shaped like a corkscrew. And in early stages, it pops up, it stays around for a while, and then goes perceivably dormant in the body. But what happens is it migrates into the central nervous system and goes into the brain, where those little corkscrew type microbes drill through the brain and turn your brain essentially into Swiss cheese. It's a very destructive and very disturbing and sad way to pass on. In this population in Tuskegee area, the prevalence of syphilis was about 35% in the 18 to 35-year-old population of men. Now, this is an extremely high number. Usually, the numbers for syphilis were running just below 20% in the rest of the states. So, what happened? Well, the treatments that were given to these men involved such brainstorm ideas as treating them with mercury and bismuth. Cure rates? Less than 30%, obviously, because when you provide people with a treatment of mercury, the first thing that happens is they die. The only people that survived were the ones that were treated with bismuth, even though, again, that's toxic and that killed a lot of the people. Now, the cure, when they say cure rate, that means that perceivably it went into uh, a regressive state where it disappeared and they didn't see the symptoms any longer. Sometimes the mercury treatment was as such that it made them seem like the disease was continuing to fester and grow, when in fact the syphilis itself wasn't growing because the mercury, being a poison, killed the syphilis along with everything else. And the symptoms that the patients had were something that looked like they were continuing with syphilis, but actually turned into the mercury poison and eventually killed the people. So this is how we conducted medicine back in the 1920s. And of course, we know now that that is not a successful way of treating someone with mercury. They've been doing that for years for different types of ailments. They saw mercury, or what was known as quicksilver, as the miracle cure for many things. And it was a cure. It was in some senses, it was a early type of, you could say, chemotherapy like treatment, because it killed everything. And if you survived the treatment, then you were considered to be cured. Oh, excuse me a second. Oh, sorry about that, folks. Get a little coughed up in the throat here. I was outside this morning in the ice and the snow and stuff like that, trying to clear out the driveway. Amongst everything else, I got a little bit of a sinus thing going on. Guess I'll need more coffee, Jeff.
This is the season. I really feel like I lose my voice a lot, especially when we're out there dealing with the snow because it's so dang humid and dry here. You know, my son was in Florida a couple weeks ago for the Daytona races, and he said it was 55 degrees there, but really humid, and he could not get warm. And we can be out here the other day. It was probably 14 degrees. The sun was shining. There was no wind, and the sky was perfectly clear. And you don't even need a jacket. It's really strange how that has an effect.
Oh, good Lord. Yes, I know what that's like. I did a couple of tours with the Army back in the day, and one tour we had was to Japan, Operation North Winds. And there was plenty of winds. Don't get me wrong. There was plenty of wind. We were up on the north part of the island of Hokkaido, which is the northernmost main island in Japan. We had wind, and we could see Russia from where we were at. Unlike some other politicians, we actually saw Russia. But the prevailing temperature was about, and I'll use Fahrenheit for our North American speaking friends. It was roughly 33 degrees solid. And precipitation was 100% with about 6,000% humidity. there was no hiding, and the temperature fluctuated between 33 and 31 for about 3 weeks. We could not get warm for the life of it. We were out in the field. We didn't come back. You're the Army. You don't build fires. The enemy sees fires right out in the field, so you don't build fires or anything like that. So you rough it for 3 weeks. You're soaking wet. It freezes overnight. It continues to. You either get sleet or you get snow, one or the other, which piles up. You understand what I mean. If you ever were in your sleeping bag and you could hear the sleet falling on you, and then it gets quiet because it changes to snow, and then you go to sleep and you wake up in the morning and you forget that all this happened, and you open your sleeping bag in the morning and all that snow and ice falls in on your face and your body. Now that is worth the price of admission to see that happen to one of your buddies. As you sit up with a well-prepared cup of ice cold coffee, watching them try to recover, jumping around. And of course, it's still 33 degrees out. So you got nowhere to go. It's just horrible, horrible. You can't get warm for anything. Oh, goodness. But I digress. So let's go back to what happened with the Tuskegee syphilis project here. By 1931, the Rosenwald Fund had cut support to all of the development projects in Tuskegee. And they decided to, some of the guys, the physicians, decided to follow some of the men who were left untreated because of lack of funds. But they wanted to start up a treatment program. Very benign. They just wanted to treat people. So follow-up for the effort was organized into the study where you had the 399 men with syphilis and 201 without. The men were given periodic physical assessments and told they were being treated. Now, the Tuskegee Institute gets a full share of credit for what happened here. And some of the Black professionals who were in the area were assigned so the men would feel more at ease with the treatment, so there wasn't any type of a racial barrier. But the Tuskegee Institute was used as the treatment location. So when I say they get a full share of credit, they get really, it's not credit. It's the detriment of what happened here to these men. Now, it was after Prohibition was repealed that we came out with the first public health assessment and medical assessment that shows what the health effects of untreated syphilis are. For the first time, they were able to figure out that untreated syphilis long term would eventually kill people. And just within a couple of years, there's one or two major papers that were published. Now, the study was criticized because it wasn't known if the men were being treated or not treated. Now, this is an interesting thing because it was a blind study for the men. They didn't know if they were being treated or not treated. So this is the first time that was publicized that they were actually engaged with treating men at the location. By 1940, they were trying to get get a how would you get it? Make it illegal or make it forbidden, right? For anybody who's under treatment for syphilis to join the military. They they tried to make make an effort to stop it, and by 1945, they were using penicillin for syphilis. But in 2 years, the U.S. Public Health Service established what they called the Rapid Treatment Centers to treat syphilis. The men in the study are what? They're not treated. That's right. They weren't treated. They were observed. They were given placebos. Now think about that. This is your government setting up what's called a rapid treatment center, saying that they're treating these men, some with syphilis, some without, and they're not doing anything. Beginning in 47, there was 127 black medical students who were rotating through the unit. By 1962, that number had grown to over 150. It wasn't until 1968 that there was concerns that were raised on ethical grounds. Now, this is 40 years after they first observed that the prevalence of syphilis was way too high in certain communities in the South, specifically Tuskegee area. And 39 years after they started the quote treatments, where they infected everyone with syphilis, even those that didn't have syphilis, so they could study the effects of newly onset syphilis. It was during the Woodstock days that the CDC reaffirmed the need for study and gains local medical society support. Now, what's that? That's the AMA. And boy, have I got stories about the AMA, the NMA, and several other. There are the orthopedic surgeons, there are the pediatric surgeons, there are the internal medicine doctors. That they all have their different groups, and they all magically started sending their support to the CDC. Now, it wasn't until 1972 that the first major news articles hit the papers. It came out in the New York Daily News. It came out in the Washington Post. It came out in the Austin. Oh, what is that? The Austin State. I can't remember, but it's the the main way left liberal newspaper in Austin. The other two are more conservative, but and then the Atlanta Constitution Journal. So it kind of spanned the whole political spectrum of specific reporters who got word of this. It wasn't a necessarily a political thing, more than it was something that everyone across the spectrum was abhorred at what was happening. They could not believe it, and they wanted to report it out immediately. Now, is that something? And I would think about this for a moment. Is that something that's racial? That we would want to let people know what the government did to black people? Does that show how racist we are as a country? Or does that show malevolence on the part of the government? Not a very deep philosophical question, but because I think you know the answer to it. But boy, oh boy, can you imagine? You can imagine if the government just by chance happened to lie to you about some AMA approved treatment that you're getting today for something, be it chemotherapy or some type of
Opioids.
opioids, right? Or some type of localized treatment for some dermatological disease.
Or if there was something that was beneficial out there that was maybe less toxic than some of the opioids or other options that they have that could keep patients comfortable, but it was readily available so the pharmaceutical companies and the government wouldn't get their cut. I wonder what that could be.
Hmm.
And what about, Greg, what about mandatory vaccines?
Well, that's a whole nother.
I figured that that's a new show.
Yeah, that's a whole ball of wax there. For example, the polio vaccines, right?
Oh, you did a show on that. We need to do that here. Sorry, I'm totally interrupting.
Yeah, no, that's that's fine. So, right. So it starts off with any good campaign you need a poster child. So they chose FDR for the poster child of polio, which was extremely interesting. Polio is a neurological disease that affects either one or the other side of the body. It never affects both sides of the body, not even in the outliers. There's no outliers with polio because it is a physiological action. You don't have someone who suffers from neurological degeneration in both sides of their body. The neurological disease that does do that is called Guillain-Barré disease. That affects both sides of the body. All of the pictures and everything that we've seen from FDR, he had neurological degeneration in both legs. He did not have polio. He had most likely Guillain-Barré disease, which at the time was the understanding of Guillain-Barré was emerging. So not many physicians knew about it, and many people with Guillain-Barré disease were misdiagnosed as having polio, which made it seem that the prevalence of polio had skyrocketed when in fact it really never did. We were given a cure. The March for Dimes Society was set up by one of the international banking tycoons who then went on to fund the polio vaccine research and subsequently underwrote all of the polio vaccine that was distributed throughout the country and eventually throughout the world. With the first rounds of polio vaccine that went out, the number of cases of polio spiked. That's right. They were giving people polio. They were not preventing polio. They were actually giving people polio. And of course, there's a lot more to it. That's just the quick overview. But as you can see, these things continue to happen. This is not something that has stopped over the years. Now, yes, it did happen through the 40s. It was developed through the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s. But we still don't see any abatement on the part of the government to push things that are essentially unnecessary or counterproductive. For example, there's a vast number. And folks, the reason I'm talking about public health is because I'm a doctor of public health. So I kind of like have a little background in this. I don't want you to think that you're just getting information from one of the conspiracy websites or something like that. That's not how we roll here. We don't roll like that, do we, Suzanne? Yeah, I didn't think so. Good.
Sorry.
Oh wait, let me do the setup again. Yeah, we don't roll like that, do we, Suzanne?
No, we could edit out that missed opportunity. Not like Chuck doesn't have enough to do.
I think it's funny just to leave it there. That's a good punchline right there.
Right.
So let me see if I can give Jeff.
That was a coffee break, actually, right there.
Coffee break. Okay, good call. Jeff, we don't roll like that, do we?
Negative, good sir.
Thank you, my friend. See, now that's how you do a timely response, Suzanne. Note that in your book.
And also, speaking of the polio, this is kind of like the tell us another story junk bond hour. But remember, also, you talked about Lyme disease as well.
Oh, sure, Lyme disease. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Lyme disease was first discovered in Lyme, Connecticut, and it was just across the Long Island Sound from the Plum Island, which is where the animal testing facility is for the U.S. government, and now it belongs to the CDC. Back in the day, it used to belong to the military, and when it belonged to the military, I would venture to say that the general population had ideas, or at least they thought they had ideas about what happened at Plum Island. In reality, you can't imagine the atrocities that happened at Plum Island. And I'll leave it at that for right now. Is that okay? Is that a good lead up for another hour of discussion?
Yes.
Yeah, Plum Island was, good God. If we start listing all of the things that happened at Plum Island, you would need, what's that Monty Python movie? The Meaning of Life. The guy in the restaurant with the bucket.
Yes.
Yeah, I could see a lot of people like projectile vomiting here from and Junk Bond remembers,
Going back to the beginning of our show, Fahrenheit off. I'm full.
Yeah.
We can keep it clean here.
I just want a thin wafer. That's all I need. I don't need anything else. Good Lord. But back excuse me. We're not supposed to have this much fun in the morning, folks. Something's wrong.
We were told to be more lively and jovial. Let's do it without you choking to death, though.
Let me try. I was talking to some of my Russian friends. Oh God, collusion on my part.
You just outed us.
What was I thinking? Oh my gosh. So I decided to present joviality in the Russian style or genre. Here we go. Ha! Very funny. I like your joke, Mr. Junk Bond.
Off to the gulag for you.
Joke so funny, you go gulag. Go now. I can't wait. I'm so excited. So, hey, back to Tuskegee.
Oh, yeah.
Where were we? Oh, yes.
We eventually circled back around.
See how we did that? It's called a circle. It's a circle of strife. We went from one part of where were we to another part of I don't know where I'm at. So in 1973, Congress starts holding hearings, and the first class action lawsuits filed on behalf of the now. And the funny thing is they call them participants in the study. That's what really gets you, doesn't it? These guys are participants. They're not participants. They're victims, for God's sake.
We participate in the tax code.
Oh,
no one signed me up, or someone signed me up. I didn't sign up.
You see how she mitigated that? That's what these lawyers do. They soften it up for you, folks. You're a victim, for God's sakes.
It only hurts once a year.
And it's going to hurt real soon, too.
Oh, yeah.
Interesting enough, though, April 15th being tax day, I did find it interesting. I've noticed years ago that that's the same day that Lincoln died. Think about that, folks.
Every cloud.
Talk about,
Uh,
oh, loss of liberty. Oh my gosh, the irony. So by 1974,
it should have been on his birthday, actually, that they have our tax day.
yeah, so more
But
appropriate.
in honor of the man who enslaved us all.
I never forget the day I first get enslaved by Lincoln. It was a good day. By 1974, there was actually, so in 1973, they filed a class action lawsuit. By 1974, the lawsuit is settled out of court. The government promised to give lifetime medical benefits and burial services to all the participants. It was called the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program. Does that not sound like a benevolent program?
It sounds like the Affordable Care Act.
It was unbelievable. Basically, the few people that were left got, quote, a lifetime of health benefits for free. Now, how sad is that? Considering that, well, wives, widows, and kids were not added to the program until the next year, even though the government knew that how syphilis spread and when it was infectious. They still did not include all of the wives and the children who were affected by the government's malevolent behavior. And the lawsuit was only settled for $10 million. And again, it was out of court. It was not even. Suzanne, tell me the difference between settling out of court and in court. Does that imply that there is an admission of guilt if you settle out of court?
You can do so without an admission of guilt, and sometimes the part of the settlement is that this is a settlement that implies no guilt whatsoever. However, in the interest of avoiding a trial and the expense of proceeding in the court system, we're going to make this case go away.
That is pathetic.
We have something like that even in the criminal court system. It's called a civil compromise. I actually represented this lady who keyed somebody's car, and it was very obvious she did it. So we were able, rather than her go through the court system, she compensated the victim completely. I had another gal that was terrified. She was in an accident and she left the scene, and she was actually looking at jail time. But again, we had a civil compromise. It's a way of avoiding getting this on your record for a nonviolent offense. So that is available in the criminal realm as well.
That's interesting. Hey, Jeff, how about that for keying a car?
I think that's such a cowardly, crappy thing to do. The woman, obviously, that's kind of the thing when you are in the criminal defense realm. People assume that you in some way endorse or are trying to justify what the people did. You're not. Everybody's entitled to representation. I've represented people that were in there for nonviolent issues or people that didn't have anybody that was hurt. And then I've represented the worst of the worst. And it's kind of like a medical doctor. If you're in the emergency room, you don't look at the moral standing of the person you're treating. You just do your job. Doesn't mean it doesn't eat away at you.
Right. Jeff, any stories that you can think of about keying a car?
Let's see. I have a memory of something in Philadelphia.
Yeah. So here's a funny on the side here, Suzanne. Not that we haven't done enough on the sides today, but on my side again, Jeff and I were up at Let My People Smoke in Philadelphia. And as you know, I'm a slow moving veteran. I'm kind of broke in many ways. So I have handicap plates on my car. Well, Jeff and I came up to the shop. Jeff's already inside the shop. And I stopped by and I see our friend, John the cop. And John says, yeah, you can park. There's a handicap spot that's right up over here. You can just park right in there because parking is a little difficult on the streets of Philadelphia, much like any major city. It's a difficult place to find a parking spot. And I come around the corner and lo and behold, there's a parking spot. So I go park there. Well, we go in, we have our cigars, we go over to the event, we come back from the event, and I come back to the car, and I had not a highly educated or well spoken person who decided to key the heck out of my car right down to the steel. Um, he did it on the what was it on the hood? No, on the roof of the car, uh, and the two side doors. Right, Jeff?
Yeah, he got you pretty good.
Yeah, it was about $2,000 in repairs. And John the cop was he was very sad, very upset because he owns that street. I mean, he's the beat cop that walks up and down every day and every night. Matter of fact, he's got a Segway. He covers a lot of area. And eventually, I come to find out that John the cop figured out who it was, and he's got the. It's kind of like a house arrest, I guess. Anywhere that guy went forever, John the cop was on his tail, watching him with a hawk eye. And in Philadelphia, you can have a handicap spot put in by request so that you can have a place. If you're handicapped, you have a place to go in front of your building. Well, people in Philadelphia, being as open minded as they are, perceive that these spots are their own personal spots. And there's no guarantee that these spots are any type of personal spot. They are a general spot to be used by any person. But of course, most of the time it's used by the person who lives there. It didn't happen in this case. The person inside got very upset and decided to take it out on my vehicle. So there's my keying story. Not as exciting because this person did not pay me back. But I think John the cop made it apparent, well known to this person that, this type of behavior is never going to be tolerated again. And I did park there after that a couple times, and my vehicle was not keyed. So I think that the lesson was learned. But to continue back with the Tuskegee story here about what's going on, it wasn't until, let's see, where was I? Okay, program. Yeah, the program was expanded. So now here's an interesting part. When the Tuskegee Health Benefit Program was first established, it only provided medical and burial services. And that was to the people that were victims of the study. The next year, it included the wives and the widows and the children and any grandchildren that came out of the program. It took another 20 years for the program to include full payment for all these folks for any health benefits that they might be looking for. Preventative medicines, antibiotics, antifungal, antiviral medications. If somebody had needed like a CPAP machine, they couldn't get any of those things. They were out of pocket expenses. How sad. 2 years later, President Clinton finally apologized. But that still does not fix the problem that we had. At the end of President Clinton's term, he established the President's Council on Bioethics. And I think that this was one of the best moves on the federal government in a long time. It set up the institutional review boards. And it says that in any type of a study, if you're using someone in any type of a study, you have to have informed consent. They have to know what they're getting into. You can't just give people a terminal disease and not tell them. Now, that would seem on the surface very intuitive, right? You just wouldn't walk up to your friend and say, "Oh, okay, you're in the medical profession, right?" And just give them a shot and not tell them what it is. This is penicillin. It's going to help you get better from X disease. This is tramadol. It's going to take care of the pain that you're suffering right now. Okay, that's kind of informed consent. There's no long-term detriment to having this shot of tramadol. Okay. I'm going to give you this shot. It contains syphilis. Eventually, it's going to kill you. You're going to be very sick for a couple weeks, and then you're going to die a slow, painful death because the microbes, the syphilis itself, is going to act like a corkscrew and drill through the soft gray and white matter in your brain and turn your brain into Swiss cheese. I hope you don't mind. Really? I can't think of anybody who would agree to that if they were told up front that this is what's going to happen. But it's even worse. The government pitched it as medical treatment. They told all these guys they're getting treated. It's going to be okay. It's going to be better. It wasn't better. It killed everybody. I'm embarrassed to say that this was an idea that came out of our government. I'm not even able to tell you that this is the only time we've done something like this. When you first heard about the, and I'll throw this to Suzanne and to Jeff, when you first heard about the Tuskegee syphilis study, what were your impressions? Anybody with a mic that's on?
Okay. I was kind of shocked, but honestly, in one way, I was not terribly surprised. Because I have no idea what our government's doing. I have no idea what the CDC is doing. I have no idea. They hide everything from us. So how would I know what they're doing to people?
You know, when I first heard about it, it was actually in one of those TV magazine news shows. I don't know if it was 60 Minutes or which one of those, but the premise was they were sharing history and events and impressions on them from the perspective of the Black community. So it was almost like, again, what do I talk about all the time? The government always sides on, or the mainstream media sides on dispensing information that makes the government look innocent or well-intentioned, and they combined this story with conspiracy theories, like Snapple was celebrating the KKK with there was a K on their label, or what else? They had a slave ship on the label. It was really about the Boston Tea Party. So they took some of the ridiculous and brilliantly combined it with the truth, which of course made you not take the truth very seriously. That was my impression of how the story was presented. So it didn't have a lot of credibility when I first heard it, but now we realize it really was the truth.
And again, folks, it's not the only one. There was, I know that lots of people have probably heard about the MK Ultra program, the mind control program that was run by the CIA, but there was also another program run by the Special Operations Division called MK Naomi. Have either of you heard of this one?
Nope.
Nope.
Yeah, okay. It's interesting because this is related to the 1951 Pont Saint-Esprit mass poisonings that happened. And this is in the southern part of France. And it's actually come out in CIA documents from MK Naomi that the CIA did a mass poisoning of people in this town that the U.S. government finally came back to France and they apologized for back in 2008, I think it was. So however many, 40, 50 something years later, we apologized. And we did, what did we do? We injected LSD into pretty much everything that these people consumed. At first, they thought it was mercury poisoning because of panagen and some other the fungicides that were used to treat the seed and the grain and stuff like that. Then they thought there was toxic fungus. They couldn't put their finger on it. They thought it was nitrogen trichloride in the bleach powder and all this other stuff. And eventually, it came out that it was it was called Project Span. And it eventually came out that it was the CIA that actually poisoned them to test the results on this community. Now, we haven't paid the French back for what happened like we did to the Tuskegee folks, but it goes to show the depth of what has happened over the years on behalf of government experimentation. In 1971, there was Iraq. It was poison grain that we delivered with methyl mercury. I mean, thank you. This is us doing humanitarian work around the world. A couple of years ago, we had in Asia Minor and over in Pakistan, we had World Health Organization people giving out vaccines to children. Well, our people happened to work for the CIA, and we embedded them inside the WHO in order to try to, quote, find bin Laden. Well, guess what? They were uncovered. They were unmasked. And you know what that does to a culture? Do you know what that does? All those and some vaccines. So let me put this like this: some vaccines work extremely well, others aren't worth the time of day. These were some vaccines that worked very well, and they worked extremely well in the region that they were being given in. All of a sudden, nobody trusted the WHO. They started killing WHO employees because they thought they were all CIA. None of the children got the vaccine. The prevalence of the diseases skyrocketed. Skyrocketed. Something that was nearly wiped out in the region skyrockets. Now it's worse than ever before.
In the interest the CIA was pursuing to keep that disease prevalent in the area?
I just think that was one of the unforeseen backlashes from them getting caught.
When humans, people like us, engage in a pattern of egregious behavior, or corporate entities are shown to do the same thing, they're dealt with either with local law enforcement, or we'll see the federal government come up with their hearings and deal with these agencies, bring them before Congress because of bad behavior. Yet we see a pattern of bad behavior from our own government that is unaddressed or ignored, swept under the rug, and a completely different standard of behavior exists for them entirely. And I just kind of wonder how long or why they continue to get away with it. At what point are we going to say we've really had enough? And even those of us that have, how can we stop this? And I think there's some discussions behind the scenes here with some of us that are truly feeling like we're wringing our hands that this is all a wasted effort. So what we have to ask ourselves is now what? Are we ever going to change this? If not, what do we do next? Something to think about.
I agree. Jeff, any closing thoughts on this insanity?
Nope, I'm just getting ready to start the music. So you got about a minute and 20 seconds.
I saw.
Are you sticking around for the second hour?
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, I have to bow out for about 10 minutes. I've got to take care of a family thing here, and I'll let you know when I pop out, when I pop back in. So, folks, we want to thank you for listening today. We covered a topic that is something that's not really talked about, quote, in polite society. We don't talk about how the government attacks people and kills people on our behalf and for our benefit. It's kind of, I would say, a little taboo. But that's what we did today. And there's many more times that this has happened. We're not going to belabor the point. We just want you to be aware that governments are capable of anything. So, for the Spy Who Loves Liberty, I'm your host, Gregory Junk Von Carpenter, with Suzanne Sherman and Jeff Johnson, the producer behind the wheel. God bless you all and have a super wonderful day.
The Wasatch Report, shooting straight on everything from prepping to politics.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Wasatch Report. If you're listening to the Cerberus Radio Network live, it is our second live hour of programming excellence here on the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Today is Monday, February 11th, year of our Lord 2019, and I have Jeff Johnson in the studio. He is manning the controls, getting the levels all set. He's going to join us momentarily. Greg Junkbarn Carpenter, he was at the helm in the first hour, and he'll be joining us back a little bit later on in this segment. Again, I am Suzanne Sherman, coming at you from the hinterlands of Utah, and I am snowed in again. I dug myself out. I had a few days of freedom, and then yesterday we had an absolute deluge come on in again. In fact, Interstate 80, a major thoroughfare, was closed west of United States Route 40 in Summit County. That's where I live, in Summit County. And this was just from the part of 80 that connects actually Park City all the way into Salt Lake City. So this was a major disruption in service. In fact, a friend of mine that lives in that area overlooking the freeway said, "How's the snow up there?" I said, "It's coming." She goes, "Well, it's a whiteout here." So I went on and checked this out. Summit County westbound lanes of Interstate 80 were closed at milepost 146. The closure was west of Kimball Junction, and due to heavy snow, unspecified number of vehicles cannot make it over the summit. This does not happen very often, where they actually closed it down. And so I tell people, if you can avoid it, stay off the roads, stay out. I've been talking also about the avalanche warnings. Jeff, remember last week we were saying we're getting a lot of storm and avalanche warnings, and we actually lost somebody in my community here. And I was coming home from the city the other day, and as I'm driving up the mountain, it was later in the afternoon. I'd been in Park City, and this was, I think, on Saturday. And I saw all these snowmobilers and the trucks and the trailers and the men in the back of trucks coming down the hill all at the same time. And I looked at the clock and I thought, okay, I guess this is the time. You know, usually see people going up and coming back down, but not usually all at the same time like this. Then I saw an ambulance in the middle of this caravan, and the lights weren't on. And I kind of thought, uh-oh. So we had this was published in the Salt Lake Tribune here. A Utah snowmobiler, 49-year-old man named Jason Lyman, was killed Saturday after being buried in an avalanche in Summit County, and that was east of Colville. There is a very large recreation area out here where snowmobiling's very popular. And I've been mentioning that the avalanche warning was in the western Uintas, and that's the mountain range. I'm kind of tucked in behind the Wasatch back in the western Uintas. And the gentleman had an avalanche beacon, which everybody should have out there, notified the officials of the avalanche. 2 friends actually pulled him out of the snow, but I think it took 30 to 40 minutes to get him out. The friends administered CPR for 40 minutes until Department of Public Safety helicopter arrived. He was flown to the hospital in Evanston, Wyoming, because we're right near there, where he died. Authorities estimate the avalanche was 500 to 600 feet wide, 4 to 10 feet deep. At least 4 have died in avalanches this year in Utah, and the last recorded avalanche related fatality for those deaths was January in 2016. So, Jeff, it's amazing how quickly things can change. Life is so beautiful. There's so many fun things to do out here, but like anywhere else, especially out here in the wilderness, things can change and become dangerous very, very quickly. You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, when I lived in Colorado for those 6 years, we would lose out there in Colorado a few skiers every year to avalanches. They're just very dangerous. And when you live in an area, well, I lived in Steamboat, we got 350 inches of snow a season. That's a lot of snow. The first year I was there, we got 110 inches in 10 days. We got 11 feet of snow in 10 days. So it's one of those things you have to know about. I've seen some avalanches. Fortunately, I was never involved in any. So, and I thought I saw an article. Do you still have 3 guys that were missing, or did they ever find them?
And that was actually mentioned to me. I got a phone call, and a friend of mine said, we think there are 3 more that are missing from up in your community, a father, a son, and a grandfather. I have heard nothing official about that. I think if that were the case, that we would know that by now. So I'm not hearing anything else about that.
Okay, well, I just wasn't sure. I saw you'd posted something, so I just was kind of based on that. So it's good that there's nothing more been said. So it might just be that they weren't missing.
But this is continuing. I'm sitting here looking out at my driveway right now. Like I said, I got out and we got the snow drifts again last night. I'll start plowing when the show is over and see if I can get out. Otherwise, I'll be here for a while. I was out yesterday and stocked up a little bit more. And even if I hadn't been, I still would have been set. But, it just makes it a little bit easier. I do have some other news out here. And this is actually some good news, as we have gun confiscations, the ERPO, otherwise known as the red flag laws, are just coming up around the country. We actually have a panel out here that approves a message that Utah doesn't need new gun laws. Amen to that. I'm going to read you a quick article from the Washington Times out here that a panel of lawmakers signed up on Tuesday on a declaration that Utah does not need any new gun control measures like the so-called red flag law. I remember I told the audience a few weeks ago that we have a lawmaker out here that wants to have these draconian safe storage laws like you see in places like California out here too. So hopefully that's going to be dismissed outright. The vote came after a number of people spoke for and against the resolution, from Republican Cory Malloy, a pro-gun rights lawmaker who said the states should just enforce its existing laws, which again, regardless of what they are, we're an area of power that were never delegated to the general government. So again, I blew some people's minds the other day on another gun discussion where I said, look, if this state wants to outright ban firearms, such as California can do, if California says we are not going to allow any guns in this state, that's within their rights. It is not a Second Amendment violation. In fact, I really wish they would, and I'll tell you why. Imagine having a gun-free state that all the gun grabbers could go to. I wonder if they would actually be happy with that. Probably not, but at least we would have an option. Going back to this article, Malloy said that the red flag laws, which temporarily take guns from people acting dangerously, what does that mean? We really don't know, infringe on constitutional rights before people have done anything wrong. His proposal now goes to the full House. We don't want to turn law-abiding citizens into criminals. And that's essentially what gun control laws do. The criminals ignore them. We are always left more defenseless. And going back to what Malloy said, as the resolution was supported, like groups, this is funny here, like the National Rifle Association. Now, Jeff, we know the NRA has supported things like the bump stock ban and these red flag laws. I think what they're doing right now is licking their finger and holding it to the Utah winds to see how they act in this regard. Mark my words, if this was in a place like New York, they would probably be, if they haven't already, supported this. And so this has been supported apparently by the NRA, while others like the student-led March for Our Lives spoke out against it. It wouldn't block gun control bills, but it is a signal that they could face an uphill battle in the conservative gun-friendly state. 8 states have passed red flag legislation last year since the Parkland, Florida high school shooting that killed 17 people. 5 states already had similar laws. To our knowledge, have such laws taken guns away from anybody that would have been likely to commit such a shooting? I think that's the problem with these laws. They really don't prevent anything. The background checks wouldn't have prevented the shootings that we've seen lately, but they still march forward with this mentality. Any thoughts, Jeff? And then we'll move on to something else.
Yeah, I had a couple thoughts. First, I just want to caveat kind of what you said about the states banning them. That would be subject to the state constitutions, and I know you know that, but I just want our listeners to not start sending hate mail, because most states, I'm going to say 47 of the 50, have some protection for their citizens in that there's restrictions against your state passing these draconian laws. Pennsylvania has one, and the fact of the matter is the state of Pennsylvania ignores their constitution as much as the federal government ignores theirs. The vast majority of Pennsylvania's gun laws are unconstitutional by our constitution, the one that matters to me in Pennsylvania. Yeah. So I just wanted that kind of caveat there.
California, I think in New York, their constitutions are silent. That's why I said California can constitutionally, meaning their constitution, outright ban firearms if they
and
so
same with New York. There's no provision in there in New York. So they can. It's 2 of the 3, and I'm pretty sure it's either Maryland or Illinois that has no other protections either.
And Pennsylvania says the right to keep and bear arms shall not be questioned. So I assume you have absolutely no firearms, any gun laws in your state, right?
Oh, that's what I'm saying. All of ours are unconstitutional. They ignore our constitution, just as the federal government ignores the restriction on them to pass federal firearms laws. That was my first caveat. I just want to make sure that everyone out there understood that, and I know you already know that. It was just the way you said it. I wanted people to not to be sending you hate mail. I was just trying to cut that one off at the pass, you know?
And you know, I've discussed this also with our friend Ben McClintock from Defending Utah. I looked up the Utah Constitution, and it said that the citizens of Utah have a right to keep and bear arms. That being said, it says the legislature also has a right to regulate firearms. So what he and I decided was, you know, Utah's constitution is essentially useless when it comes to that. The point being, under a federal system, this is really simply an issue of jurisdiction. Again, if we look to the federal judiciary to regulate firearms, ultimately our rights, natural rights, not our Second Amendment rights, are going to be decided by 9 politically connected black robe messiahs, none of whom we voted for, none of whom are accountable to us. That is not representative government. And we actually had this come up. A friend of mine asked for the link for my article on national reciprocity published by the 10th Amendment Center. We call it national reciprocity as a Trojan horse. In fact, I'll bring it up just in case I want to get into that a little bit. But we have now, again, they're talking about in Fox News. Let me find the article because I just skipped it here, about senators bringing up, again, concealed carry, national reciprocity. Again, this is an article out of, let's see what news center, WCJB, ABC 20. Senator is pushing to allow concealed carry to apply across state lines. We already have a system of reciprocity. It is among the states and it is voluntary. And the article says that under current laws, people with concealed carry permits cannot cross into another concealed carry state with their handgun. Now, that's not true. They're lying. We can. For instance, if you have a concealed carry permit in Utah, I think it's good in over 30 states. But they're making it seem like you can't. And again, this is the disingenuous media. Even though this seems to be pro-gun, it is pro-big government. That's even if the state has the same laws. No, it's not. You're lying. But as TV 20 Washington correspondent Jillian Angeline reports, some senators are hoping to change that. Jillian needs to do a little more research. Here we go with the constitutional conservative Ted Lee Cruz, right, argues in Texas to get a concealed carry license, you go through background check, criminal records check, you go through training. And when you receive that license should be valid in other states. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your not natural born citizen, constitutional conservative right there. Does not understand the Second or the 10th Amendment. Texas senators say allowing someone who has a concealed carry permit to take that gun into another state with similar laws is just common sense. Here's another winner. Senator John Cornyn said, to me, it's like a driver's license. If I can get a driver's license to drive my car in Texas, why can't I drive my car in Virginia or Maryland? This is why we need to get this clown out of office and elect Dwayne Stovall, who understands representative government. He understands scale, and he understands the relationship between the states and the federal government. These guys all lean towards national solutions for state issues. Going back to the article, this is not the first time the Concealed Carry Reciprocity Act has been introduced. But Senator Cornyn hopes that this time it will become law. Andrew Patrick with the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence calls the bill troubling. He says some states have easier concealed carry requirements than others. Would someone from Chicago be comfortable with someone from South Dakota coming in who's had no training at all and walking the streets with a deadly weapon? It seems there's one thing both sides can agree on. A divided Congress may mean the legislation won't go anywhere. Senator Cruz tells the reporter that wrote this article he thinks it's unlikely the House Speaker Pelosi would even entertain a vote on concealed carry reciprocity, given most Democrats are opposed to loosening gun regulations. Cornyn says he'll be urging the Senate Judiciary Committee Chairman Lindsey Graham to get the legislation into the Senate to vote very soon.
Suzanne,
go ahead.
The Republicans had the House, the Senate, and the presidency for 2 years. If this is such a big priority, why didn't they bring it up then when they know they could have got it through? They know full well that there's no way Pelosi's going to bring it up. So it is just political grandstanding. Yeah. That's all this is.
They had 2 years to get this done. Planned Parenthood continues to be funded. And I think there was something else. Oh, I think it was Massey was saying he's going to push to have the Department of Education dismantled. Well, I'm sorry, you had 2 years to do that. When I did say that, I was reminded that he has tried this in the past. Has he tried it during the previous or the first two years of the Trump administration? I don't know, but it seems disingenuous to me to push something like that along when you know it's a dead letter. It will never go anywhere. But as I said in my article, national reciprocity is a Trojan horse. I asked, is it something that should be passed from a constitutional perspective? Again, I understand the logic of Cruz and Cornyn. But again, the constitutional limitations in our federal republic has to trump, no pun intended, your opinion or your emotions. Again, candidate Trump supported national reciprocity. He said, we don't need any more gun laws. We need to enforce the gun laws we already have. Well, now it's never been harder to get a firearm now that we've had Republican House, Senate, and White House, but I digress. So again, is this a good idea? What I explain in here, I quote St. George Tucker. He wrote the first systemic commentary on the Constitution. By the way, Carl Jones, a good friend of mine, co-wrote this article with me. And here's what he said. And he ties in firearms, the Second Amendment with the standing armies. Standing armies, the founding fathers feared in times of peace. Well, I guess to get around that, we're never in times of peace. But here's what St. George Tucker said: wherever standing armies are kept up, when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is under any color or pretext whatsoever prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. Well, people will say, well, Suzanne, we're not trying to take away your gun rights. We're trying to enhance them. In fact, in the proposed legislation that came from the Senate, you have to have, there's a Senate rule, you have to have a statement of constitutionality to support this. What was the statement of constitutionality? They cite the Second Amendment. As we've explained before, as I explained in my article, How Heller Botched the Second Amendment, Scalia completely misunderstood the purpose of the Second Amendment when he said, when he had his analysis, what kind of guns does it protect? It doesn't. It doesn't protect anything. All it does is reiterate the fact that the firearms were never a delegated area of authority for the general government. Accordingly, it is hands off. So if Congress cannot prohibit or infringe upon our rights, they cannot legislate about them at all. Article 1 authorizes them to arm the militia, so some feared that Congress would likewise either refuse to arm it or even disarm it. So the Second Amendment, again, serves two purposes: avoid the need to implement standing armies, reserve to the states the authority to regulate arms in an effort to leave ultimate control over to the government within the hands of the states and their respective people. Quoting Madison's 45, the powers delegated to the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. Those are to remain in the hands of the states. Governments are numerous and indefinite. The powers reserved to the states will concern the lives, liberties, and properties of the people, the internal order, improvement, and prosperity of the state. Now, again, the article that I cited about the proposed legislation explains even driver's licenses. It also explains how we have different standards of tests for issuing the permits. So, and as I've explained before, California, I left because of their firearms laws, is a may issue state. So whether or not you are going to be issued a concealed carry permit, you have to show that you need it. Personal defense has been adjudicated as not sufficient. And even if you do need it and can show you need it, it is up to the discretion of local law enforcement. So say that you're the subject, the victim, who has somebody that is a target of a restraining order. That official might say, no, they have a restraining order. That's all the protection they need. It is discretionary. That discretion will lie within the personal taste of the law enforcement officer in charge in your jurisdiction. In my case, it was Santa Clara County Sheriff Lori Smith, who had a blanket policy not to issue any of them, the caveat being unless you were a significant donor to her campaign. So this is a bad idea. We will see court challenges. I've discussed this before. Again, California, even if you do take the course, it's a 2-day course, intensive training. I helped teach it. I taught even the legal aspect of it as well. Utah is a half-day course. There's no live fire training. And California might not want people that have less training carrying firearms in their state. So then what's going to happen is California is going to file a lawsuit, and then it's going to go to the Supreme Court, who's going to come up with their own set of standards for when we can carry and what kind of tests we're going to have. And mark my words, it is not going to end up looking like the laws we have in Utah, Arizona, Wyoming. It's going to look more like you see in California or New York or Illinois, and nobody will be happy. But thanks to handing this over to the federal government, we're going to give them this power. Look for magazine restrictions. Look to having to register whatever your carry is going to be. And then if you make a mistake and accidentally have the wrong gun, it's a net for ensnaring law-abiding citizens, just like all gun control. Any more thoughts, Jeff?
Not really on that part of it now. We've pretty well covered that. But I did want to go back to what we originally were talking about, these red flag laws. Prior to all these laws, there were already laws in place that denied people that had mental illness guns. So what's the point of all of a sudden having these new red flag laws? It's to take guns away. And there is no due process, where in the past there may have been due process required to take the firearms from these people that were mentally ill. But now they can do it without due process, and they don't even really, it doesn't matter who it is. The police can make this assertion that you are a danger to people, full well knowing you're not. But once they make the assertion, they come and take your guns. It is rife with the ability of the government to just blanket take firearms from everyone, because they are going to declare everyone a threat to society because they own them to begin with.
And I've seen stories also that not only are these happening across the states, but this is now they're talking about federal red flag laws. So here's the problem. You can be turned in by a little brown shirt that you know, and maybe your local community will say, you know what, this doesn't quite meet the standard, and miraculously not have them take their guns away. But now you've got a second tier to deal with, just like we see if there's a crime and then and if somebody's let loose and whoop, this is a federal civil rights violation. So now you're going to have to protect yourself from a federal level as well. Again, this is not an issue for the feds to deal with. And the NRA has already shown that they're willing to work with these laws. So the fact that they're saying they support this statement in Utah is completely disingenuous. So here is an article also that just came out. This is from the Faux News Network, that the courts are issuing an unprecedented number of orders to seize these firearms from people they deem to be mentally ill or threats to others, following a rash of state-level legislation aimed at curbing mass shootings across the country. Again, tell me the connection. Tell me how you take all these guns from people that are somehow make it on the radar, and that this is going to prevent mass shootings. And they act like we have these mass shootings on a daily basis. Again, I say every time we have one of these shootings, the gun grabbers cry their crocodile tears, and behind the scenes they celebrate, because ultimately the end game is to disarm us. So people really need to realize that and stop giving them the argument that, yes, we have to do something. This is how we got that ridiculous bump stock ban, more of these background checks, more of these orders. And again, if you think if you're getting a concealed carry permit within your state, guess what? They all go through the DOJ. So now you have done, a backdoor or de facto gun registration with the feds. Nice work. I will not get one.
Were you waiting for me to jump in? I'm sorry.
I'm kind of going through Windows right now. We're playing Clear Suzanne's desktop.
Yeah. I know that we had a whole bunch of stories the other day we never ever got to, but again, I'm gonna go off here on the NRA for just a second. Mm-hmm. I still call it the greatest danger to our natural rights out there, because they are not interested in applying the Second Amendment as it is intended. You can sit there and prove that it's intended to be a restriction on the federal government, but they want to incorporate it to the states and make it so that they are the broker of what gun confiscation or gun control laws are out there. This weekend, I went to the Great American Outdoor Show in Harrisburg, and I don't know this for the reason why they weren't there, but this year there were at least 5 major gun manufacturers that did not show up to the NRA's event. I'm starting to wonder if some of these gun manufacturers are starting to realize that the NRA is actually the danger, because they are willing to compromise and say, hey, we'll give you bump stocks. Hey, we'll give you red flag laws. We'll do. When these things are absolutely unconstitutional, 100%, when you apply the Constitution and the Bill of Rights correctly.
Yeah, and I would get phone calls because I've been a member for a long time. Excuse me, I'm not going to renew my membership. I also got my sorry, remember we were talking about the cold weather and how it hurts our breathing out here on Greg's show, of how they call me, raise funds, and we're working with Congress, we're fighting Congress with their gun control laws, but we're also working with them to get to restore our gun rights. I said, no, you're really not, because any law by Congress is unconstitutional. So please stop talking about our Second Amendment rights. And again, we've discussed this on and on and on. I want to change gears, Jeff, and go back to the focus. Remember, I was talking last week, the latest distraction we had was a hat and drums on the steps at the feet of the tyrant responsible for this one united state, indivisible, with liberty and justice for none. The issue with Nick Sandmann and Nathan Phillips. And then I'm going to get into an article. Last week, I discussed cultural Marxism and how that's the new topic of discussion, and how our conversations and these battles we have are going to all be coming through that filter, the auspices of cultural Marxism. And that's the framework of our discussions. And then today I have an article I want to discuss identity Stalinism. But first, this was something I just came across. Nick Sandmann's lawyer announces action against Nathan Phillips, and that was the Native American with the drum who, in my opinion, committed an act of assault and maybe even a battery, from what I saw on the footage, against a 16-year-old boy. But an attorney representing, this was actually an article from The Blaze, Nick Sandmann, a 16-year-old student from Covington Catholic High School, became the center of a political controversy, have announced legal action against Nathan Phillips. And who said that Sandmann and his classmates were mocking him. Atlanta-based lawyer L. Lynn Wood, who is known for winning defamation cases, said that Phillips will be sued for his lies and false accusations against Sandmann and the Covington student, which he said are all well documented. Wood said the first round of lawsuits will be filed within 2 weeks. The legal team sent notices to more than 50 journalists, media personalities, Hollywood celebrities, media organizations, and Catholic organizations on February 1st, notifying that they could potentially be sued for defaming Sandmann. Those entities, the lawyers allege, propagated a false narrative that accused Sandmann and Covington students of mocking Native Americans in Washington, D.C. last month. And, even when the truth came out, that didn't even change the narrative of these pundits. It really didn't. In the letters, the lawyers requested any evidence pertaining to Sandmann, Covington, and overall incident be preserved for future use in legal proceedings. At the onset, the list of potential targets was 54, but Wood said now the number continues to grow, explaining that the team of lawyers is in the process of sending formal written retractions demands in conformity with statutes and states in which the litigation may be filed. Woods also confirmed that the Diocese of Covington continues to investigate the Washington incident involving Covington students, although he does not know why. So I'm glad that somebody's standing up for this kid. That must have been horrible what he went through, but this all comes under the, like I said, the framework with cultural Marxism. This is an article, Taki's Magazine, takimag.com, and it's called Identity Stalinism. And this came out at the end of January this year. And they discuss, again, the incident what I talked about just now with Sandmann and the Native American, Phillips. And this is what he says. He quotes Tucker Carlson saying that Carlson says that the hate hysteria is not really about race. And I disagree, and I disagree, as does the author of this article. He said it really is about race. And that's why so many journalists and Hollywood figures, this is from the article, explained how they could tell the kid was evil just by looking at him. It's written on his face. Sure, he didn't do anything, but did you see that smirk? He had an assault smirk, I think, Jeff. He was brandishing his assault smirk. Anyone who looks like him deserves to be punched. And we saw so many calls for violence about this kid. Now we had Hogg and his little skinhead buddy Gonzalez going out on the trail to campaign for gun control, all of a sudden we have to believe kids. They're precious. We have to protect them. But this kid who did nothing but go on a field trip with his classmates is now the subject of calls to violence. Returning to the article, the least inappropriate way for a white male to respond to being berated by his racial superiors is that like a Starbucks barista who got shouted at with a megaphone from 3 feet away. I believe we showed that and discussed that article one time. That was going around. And even his stoicism seemed suspiciously dignified. To be precise, the roar of racist rage from the great and good directed that this boy is all about implementing the Democrats' grand strategy, which is to assemble a coalition of margins of American society. Immigrants, welfare mothers, tech billionaires, transgenders, hedge fund guys, black church ladies, gays, Jews, the unmarried, movie stars, felon, and so forth and so on. In contrast, the more similar you are to the Minutemen of 1776, the more likely you are to vote Republican. The GOP appeals to core Americans, the Democrats to fringe Americans. Again, this is only possible because we are looking at the continuation of top-down solutions. So every single social policy issue, which I said earlier was intended to be left to the states, is now a matter of national contention. And that's what we've got. Returning to the article, but merely listing the Democrats' constituent interest groups points out the main problem of the master plan. Their various fringes can't stand one another. I have an article that I might have time to get to today. If not, I'll do it on our next show about how the left is eating itself. It's really going to be entertaining to watch this next dog and pony show, also known as the presidential election cycle. But I digress. For example, the once celebrated Women's March self-destructed last weekend over how high on the totem pole of victimology ranked Jews. Most of its Muslim leaders consider Jews to be oppressors of Palestinians, and most of its black leaders see Jews as just white people with even more money. But feminist groups need Jewish donors because Jews really are richer on the average. Similarly, you're going to see how ridiculous this all gets. This guy does a great job on this article. In this incident at the Lincoln Memorial, Black Hebrew Israelites, a bizarre black cult rather like the Westboro Baptist Church in their repugnant behavior, repeatedly screamed racist insults at both the American Indian leftists and the Catholic schoolboys. They got a pass in the media. Nobody really talked about them. You know, they were kind of like the little troublemaker that starts this whole incident and then hides and giggles from behind a curtain or from a safe spot. The progressive stack is purposely kept vague, they say here, other than that white Christian males are at the rock bottom. It's clear to Indians these days that they are lower than the blacks on the intersectional totem pole. And I always talk about this myself. We have a hierarchy. There's always some professed group of victims that we're willing to throw under the bus for another when it suits our purpose. Standing up to blacks, they say, can turn you into another barbecue Becky on social media or get you killed. So eventually the Indians tried to regain some dignity in a cheese stands alone maneuver by trying to humiliate the even lower ranking white boys who are hardly likely to respond violently. Bullying those you aren't afraid of has been recently renamed punching up. If you see the other video from this event, these people were saying that the Indians lost because they worship things like eagles. That's why they were overrun. I mean, they had some really hateful language. And these were some big black dudes all standing around. You would think our hero Nathan would take his drum, maybe hit one of these big guys over the head with it. No, he turned his attention over to high school kids punching up, much like the Gestapo goes and picks on the Christian bakers. Why did it go find a Muslim bakery to pick on? Because you're afraid of them. That's why. Because they throw you off roofs. That's why. Punching up. Standing up to the blacks. Okay, I did that paragraph. getting back to here, other examples from the weekend suggest the only way the Democratic Party can hold together is by constantly ginning up excuses for fringe Americans to hate core Americans even more than they hate each other. The funny thing is, this is my analysis now, they do this at the same time they call for unity, and they complain, they bitch and moan, oh, Trump is so divisive. You love divisiveness. You cause it, and then you complain about it. You want diversity, and then you bitch and moan and scream for equality. You can't have it every way. But keeping us distracted, changing the goal, is how they get away with this. We can't keep up with all of, they keep changing the target. And the Republicans are following this like a kitten with a laser pointer and getting nothing done. The Democrats' fundamental problem is all the hate roiling their own constituents. They project this hate onto the Republicans, their own tendency towards hatred. We've said this before. This is quintessential projection. Freud came up with a lot of bad ideas, but one of his better ones is projection. Human beings defend themselves by attributing their own bad traits to others. This is exactly what they're doing. This article quotes someone named Dennis Dale. These hoaxes pull the veil back by releasing the demonic, resentments of those who think they've suddenly been given free rein to express them. There's a reason the left projects the charge of a dog whistle. It's precisely where they're at, itching to give their animus and hatred a free rein. Going back to the author of this article, the Democrats constantly claim that the reason they hate their enemies is not because they are inconveniently in their way, but because they are hateful. Again, if we say that they're hating us because, or if they say they hate us because we're in their way, they have to defend their policies. We don't have time to get it today, but I have the blog from Che Guevara's own website explaining her Green New Deal. And again, her policies are going to fail. So they have to go, on the merits. So they have to, again, go to an argument of hatefulness. We hate them. Not the case. The reason they are hateful is because they are hate-filled. Thus, a high school junior waiting for his bus becomes a symbol of hate. The political logic generates much hate hypochondria in the media. For example, countless trained journalists watch a brief video of American Indian leftists trying and failing to provoke this kid and immediately concluded that the reason they felt so much hatred for the white youth is because he was the hater. Not surprisingly, the media offer up constant supply of 2 minutes of hate to serve as what they say here, the KKK crazy glue of the coalition of fringes, many of which turn out to be fiascos. Countless battlefields chosen by the establishment have turned out to be self-defeats. The Democrats' fundamental problem is that white people on the whole just aren't hate-filled enough for their yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay. Have you taken a breath this last half hour?
No.
I was just curious because I kind of just thought, that I was listening to what you're talking about, and I hate the fact that you don't breathe.
I do breathe
because I hate breathing. I thought I'd add a little bit of a picture for folks. Like, for example, I hate the Nazis because they hate everybody else. Now, is that a good reason to hate the Nazis because they hate other people?
It doesn't solve much.
Or should I step one step above that and despise them because they were putrid thugs who ran amok and destroyed the lives of millions of people? I would prefer to take the high road and say that I don't hate people just because other people hate people that hate people. I think that's a circular discussion. It's not even, you can't even make an argument out of that.
And that, you just hit the nail on the head. You can't make an argument. How do you deflect these people when they give you nothing meritorious to deflect? He quotes Upton Sinclair in here, who said it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Not surprisingly, many in the Democrat media complex understood the video of the besieged boy acting classy as yet more evidence of the white wickedness for which they hope to be rewarded for uncovering. A basic concept, they say here, explains the much more fashionable moral reasoning in the current year is whom, while promoting the civilization of agriculture in 1929, which led to the Ukrainian Holodomor, Stalin announced, the fact is, we live according to Lenin's formula. Whom? We will knock them, the capitalists, flat, give them, as Lenin expresses it, its final decisive battle, or will they knock us flat? Other principles of morality believe in objective standards for behavior, but Stalinism assumed that something was good, and this is the point of this whole article here. Something is good if the good people, meaning the Stalinists, did it, but bad if the bad people, meaning those hated by the Stalinists, did the same thing. Similarly, under today's rules of identity Stalinism, which we saw it perfectly explained in the situation here with this boy, while the aggressor objectively was obviously the man banging the drum in the boy's face, that adult was non-white and leftist, while the child who was white and a Trump supporter. So, by the rules of whom, the assailant had to be the victim, and the victim, the attacker. Under the current dispensation, the white boy's manly impassivity under assault just proved he was the bad guy. And here's the quote from George Orwell's 1984. To wear an improper expression on your face, to look incredulous when a victory was announced, for example, was itself a punishable offense. There was even a word for it in Newspeak. Face crime. Folks, that's where we are right now. Thoughts, Junk Bond?
I just wanted to jump in. The rules for radicals, and I'm not up on that. I've never read it. So I'm going to hope that Greg's up on it or you're up on it. But isn't one of his things is that you have to fix the enemy? So they're fixing who the enemy is. We aren't given anything other than their derision, and I'm not quite sure how to explain this, but Saul Alinsky had these rules that's how they were going to make us into the evil people by fixing us in the media and then destroying us. So I don't know how that all fits in, but I think that's how this is all playing out. They're using the rules for radicals to make us into the evil people.
Right, and they marginalize dissent. They discredit you. They find out that and we've seen this by calling Supreme Court nominees racist, haters, and then when we see the same behavior by that party, it's completely ignored. There have been pictures that have resurfaced now of Hillary Clinton in blackface. Blackface seemed to take over the narrative, but that's being ignored. Apparently, Joy Behar had dressed in blackface for some Halloween party. We don't see that. Hillary Clinton recently just said that all black people look alike. Cricket.
That's kind of funny because my wife of Chinese descent, I was driving in Chinatown one day, and she sees a guy up on the corner. And she says, I think I went to high school with that guy. I said, well, let's drive over there closer. You get a closer look or something. Maybe you can, address it and talk to him. And she says, no. She says, I can't tell them apart. They all look the same to me. I said, wait a minute. I said, you're Chinese. She said, yeah, but all Chinese people look the same. I was like, what the hell are you talking about, woman? I mean, reality is reality. Okay. So yeah, Chinese people look the same to Chinese people too. Go get over it. Get over it. Jeff, what you're thinking of, though, it predates Saul Alinsky. It actually goes back to Vladimir Lenin. And one of my favorite Lenin quotes of all time is, the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. And that, I think, really sums up what's happening. You're seeing the opposition jump up out of nowhere, but the opposition is controlled by the same people that lead the charge from the other side in the first place. How else can you better control a revolution? How else can you better manage the political discourse which is going on, which will project certain people into power and make others relinquish their power and move on to private life?
It's also a matter of what we see, the Facebook 30-day bans. Now we're talking about superiority, not just equality. And I want to share with you a story because I think this is coming here. We're seeing this again with the shadow banning on Facebook, on social media. One of the reasons it's so difficult to get messages out that go back to purposes of values, family values, traditions of personal responsibility, and not relying on the government to bail you out of your own mistakes. This is a story out of England, but a 38-year-old woman was arrested in front of her children and locked in a cell for 7 hours after calling a transgender woman a man on Twitter. We're literally putting people in cages over this. A mother was arrested in front of her children, locked up for 7 hours after referring to a transgender woman as a man online. 3 officers detained a woman named Kate Scottow at her home before quizzing her at a police station about an argument with an activist on Twitter over so-called dead naming. The 38-year-old woman from Heshire had her photograph, DNA, and fingerprints taken and remains under investigation more than 2 months after her arrest on December 1st. She has had neither her mobile phone or her laptop returned, which she says is hampering her studies for a master's in forensic psychology. Writing an online forum from Mumset, she says that she has been served with a court order that bans her from referring to her accuser as a man. She claimed, "I was arrested in my home by 3 officers with my autistic 10-year-old granddaughter and breastfed 20-month-old son present. I was detained for 7 hours in a cell with no sanitary products before being interviewed and then later released under investigation. I was arrested for harassment and malicious communications because I called one of them out as misgendered on Twitter." Confirming the arrest, the Hertfordshire police said, "We take all reports of malicious communication seriously." How vague is that? Malicious communication.
They said serious too.
Seriously. Yes, seriously, folks. The case is the latest where police have been accused of being heavy-handed in dealing with people who go online and debate gender issues. Now, you can just have a debate and be charged with the crime. Think about this. If you tie this now into some states like Illinois, I think New York as well, want to look at your social media before issuing you permits to have a gun. We know the direction in which these in the government overwhelmingly tend to lead. What do you think they're going to see if you have engaged in these debates, civil or otherwise? I can't tell you how many threats I have gotten by people over my hunting pictures or my views on these subjects. I had a message from somebody say, "I thank God I was raised by somebody compassionate enough not to judge me for being a transgender. Thank God you didn't raise me." And I said, if you had been raised by me, you wouldn't be confused by something as simple as what's in your pants.
That seems like one of the simplest things there is.
Exactly. You could go to jail for that in England.
And it's interesting because there's some limited data that's been released just this month in research, identifying that some of the issues of identifying yourself simply as identifying yourself as a man or a woman is related to some type of genetic process and different types of proteins and enzymes and how they interact with your DNA. Because we have manipulated the protein levels and enzymes in our body through different activities, for example, the mitochondria in your body is long-term affected by excessive antibiotic use. It messes you up in ways that we never saw possible. I know there is more information forthcoming about transgenderism and the rise of transgenderism, and it's all related to our abuses and overuses of medication and our unhealthy eating. For example, preservatives. Preservatives don't break down in your cells. It clogs your cells up. It doesn't allow them to maintain a normal cycle of life and death. It messes you up. And we don't look at this. We don't measure this. We don't analyze these things. I'm telling you right, I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to say that this issue with this perceived transgenderism issue is related to nutrition and medication overuse and misuse. I guarantee it. There is way too much writing on the wall. Too many research projects are starting to show that this is exactly what's happening. So when we go out there, we lop breasts off of 8-year-olds and 10-year-olds and penises off of 8-year-old boys. Who's wrong?
You raised such a great point, because I noticed when my boys were growing up, excuse me, I gave them the meat sources we had. This is why I hunt, by the way. I know the elk that I give my boys has never been fed hormones, antibiotics. It's always had a natural diet. But I saw when they were in school and their peers, their friends were eating, the factory farm chickens and food from McDonald's, the hormones in these foods. Their friends, these little boys, were developing breasts. I'm not kidding you. These boys were getting breasts. There was a documentary actually on, I think it was on PBS, about the use of the herbicides. And they did a comparative study in Mexico where they had a community in the farmlands area, and there was a big garbage dump with tons and tons of empty bottles of Roundup. And then they compared them to the kids in a mountain community where it was not agricultural and you did not have this. They visited the two communities. They gave these kids, and they noticed breasts were developing in girls as young as 8 years old. Boys were getting these mentally, physically. They were not interested in play. They gave these kids in the farming community balloons to play with, and they sat there and looked at them. The community in the mountains that was unaffected by these herbicides and the horrible impacts they have took these balloons and were playing with them. They were active. They were physical. And this is what we're seeing now with the food we're giving these kids, with the chemicals they're exposed to. We have a generation of kids that are not active. They're sitting in front of their computers. You don't see them out and playing around anymore. Then there's the fact that if they are, people will call the police on the parents.
Right, okay, because you're not paying attention to your kids. So I'll throw out my last point here, and then I'll let you finish up with everything. What you're talking about, boys, men growing breasts, it's called gynecomastia. That's the medical term for it. And there is more prevalence of gynecomastia in men in urban situations than there is in rural situations. And there appears to be a link to the food source, because the food source has increased hormones, like you mentioned, and gynecomastia is a hormonal imbalance in men. But more importantly, it's linked probably to the antibiotic use of the animals, where it manipulates mitochondrial activity in the animals, which goes on to manipulate the quality and the benefits of actually eating the meat of these animals themselves. This is what's causing the problem. And because it's a multi-staged problem, most researchers haven't gotten to that point yet.
Think also, we all saw the footage of this guy wearing pink demanding to be called ma'am in New York. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
This man, and the news, shame on the news media, by the way, calling this person a woman. This was not a woman.
Well, they don't want to go to jail either.
Exactly. They don't want to be sued. This man in a pink shirt and high heels, some jewelry, and some. You can't put lipstick on a pig. It's still going to be a pig. So this man with lipstick on is throwing things, knocking things over, behaving in a threatening manner. Imagine the hormones, the chemicals, psychotropic drugs. I have no doubt. We know these people have mental conditions that these people are being influenced by. Is there any call to restrict, maybe if they have firearms? Do you want this person having a gun? This goes back to the hierarchy we were talking about. We're not going to attack the right of any transgenders that want to have guns when we know these people are loopy as can be, as are their families, by the way. Have you seen this show Jazz I see advertised? Here's a minor child who is going to transform from a boy to a girl, meaning they're going to I think they've done it on the show, cut off his genitalia, install a new one. And all these doctors and social workers standing around, nobody saying, hey, do you think maybe this is a bad idea? So we have this complete incoherence in where we're going forward, but we're out of time. I'm hoping we're going to go again live. I think Jeff is available tomorrow. We're going to try and bring you more shows, new talent coming in. That's in the works. I've got some exciting news coming up. We've got a lot going on. So on behalf of Greg Junkbond Carpenter, the spy who loved Liberty, Liberty Minutes as well. Spy who loves Liberty. You still love it. And Jeff want to thank you for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow. This has been the Wasatch Report. You've had 2 live hours of the Cerberus Radio Network, where we defend liberty and freedom from the flames of tyranny. Thanks for listening.